name is Fosia Hussein. I born in Somalia in Boroma, 1996. I didn't grow up in Somalia, but when I was like 12 years, my family, they moved to the refugee for Ethiopia. I go to school in Ethiopia. It's hard to learning the first language of Ethiopia because Ethiopia, they talk like 80 more than language. And the most important that you're learning is Amharic. So I don't know Amharic, and I can't write. The writing is very hard. I have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. I'm the youngest of my family, and but all of them, they are not stay with me now. Just I stay with 5 of my sisters, and I hope so to stay all of them. 5 of my sisters and my mom and my sister's son were come together in United States to Arizona. I don't imagine that day how I feel, because I get a new life, new.
Welcome to Happiness and the City. This is Barbara, and today I wanted us to focus attention on something that I find very important, and that is about business planning. First of all, let me go to Wikipedia, which I love to use as my little organizing tool. Okay, so here, let me just do this. Okay, so let's go to Wikipedia. The reason I'm getting into this particular topic is because I feel there's just general disorganization and mess in understanding what business planning is at high government level. The companies themselves have a situation that requires executive action and thinking and direct responsibility. And executives are not elected officials. They are selected because they have a high level of competence in a given area, and then they create plans for a particular organization, like Intel or Apple or Google, Twitter, and then employees give their input, and there is this tremendously efficient way of dealing with day-to-day organization, but also business plan, at least 3 years or 5 years or 10 or 20. I kind of maximize at 40, but I know some people even think in terms of 50 years for certain kinds of businesses. And the long-term kind of business applies to thinking in real estate, in architecture, in urban planning. And now that you helped me deal with the trauma of this car accident, in which I was drastically disconnected from my business at that time was journalism, international journalism, with a focus on investigative reporting, and I was separated from this. And frankly, I never came back to that business. This division was so strong, and I was explaining to you last week how ever since that time I've been dealing with reconnection, matters of contact, and how deeply I understood the importance of contact at many levels. So now I feel empowered, and I thank all of you who prayed for me, who expressed a lot of empathy in this situation. I feel that now is a good opportunity to talk about business and business planning as I pray to God for miraculous healing of all the issues in my life around connection to business. I come from a long line of business savvy people on both sides of my family, my father's side and my mother's side, and I wanted to have it healed in me. And as I understand how important the business planning is in my life, because in my life I couldn't plan, because there was accident, separation from business, and that was it. No more planning. But now, with God's grace, I understood I actually have time and opportunity in divine calendars to plan. So this is very healing for me to even think about it, and to understand how awesome it is to have that future vision. So we have to understand that business is a complex concept. It refers to any activity connected with labor, capital, and money. The general understanding under business theory is that business concepts are different in different types of countries. There are some countries that allow only government-run businesses. There are other countries that only allow government as a business. So when country allows government-owned businesses, like in China, the government is the owner, but businesses are not directly run by the government. They are connected to it as an owner, but they have a lot of autonomy. There are some countries that don't allow that. The only business allowed is government, and then government has departments of house building or department of steel management. There are other countries like the United States of America that have primarily focused as business totally separated from the government. And I would have to do more research on this particular situation in America today. But when we look at general structure of businesses, businesses are private, and then government creates subsidies or creates certain ways to connect with those businesses. But the idea of business is totally separated from the idea of government. And government is not viewed as a business in America. It's viewed as an organization. Business is also organization, but U.S. government is considered taxpayers' organization with focus on spending money, not making money. So it's different than in countries that only allow government to make money. And then there are other countries that allow mixture of government-owned businesses and private businesses. One of those is obviously Saudi Arabia. So, in order for us to look at current issues such as healthcare funding, I'm talking particularly about American problems because I live here, I am American, by naturalization, so I'm interested in what is happening in my country. And now we have a huge situation with hurricanes and fires in California. And we are dealing with a situation in which people look only at current management of a particular weather disaster, but there is no long-term planning. That gave me an opportunity to think that we need to develop new perception of business planning in America that includes current structures of private companies, but also allows business planning for American government. Because I realized that this is the missing link. This doesn't exist. And it created a situation in which an enormous amount of money, billions and billions of dollars, are spent to deal with emergency situation, and virtually nothing is spent to create long-term business vision to avert certain damages. I'll give you an example in California. People who study climate in California know that wildfires is a phenomenon in this part of America, and they get frequently repeated. So, what does the government do? Just helps currently in an emergency, or doesn't help at all? And there's all of that damage and fatalities. In a business planning culture that would include government having opportunity to create long-term business vision for matters that concern government, that would create a vision in which architecture, construction, emergency responses, all of those things would be included in the plan, and the money would be used, for instance, to build solid reinforced concrete houses with access to fire prevention measures. That would create a situation which there would be no fatalities. This can be included in the business plan for California, and that would create long-term vision of safety and security from natural disasters. So, in the context of American needs, we have to create that vision of government having will and opportunity to create long-term vision. Because right now, what we have is a certain person is voted into the executive position, certain people are voted into Congress, and I'm talking about primarily the legislative and executive powers, because the judicial power is a separate issue. It's even more complicated than what is happening in the executive and legislative. But judicial power also doesn't have that long-term vision for government planning as business, so that people feel stable in their futures. It's very important, because if we have a situation in which there is no long-term business planning and only short-term solutions dealt with taxpayers' money that flows to the government offices, and then we have a judicial system that by one decision can change destiny of billions and billions of dollars, we have a situation of great inefficiency. Another bad situation is with healthcare. The reason there's so much pain and so much fear around this is because there is no long-term vision of healthcare, and the connection of healthcare is to investment organizations and funds who are run by people interested in short-term gain. They're not interested in long-term vision of health. Now, the government funds a lot of those private organizations through taxpayers' money, and the government doesn't have its own vision of long-term health situation of American citizens that would develop vision for what to do with now almost 400 million people. And I think that we will not be able to move forward at all until we start dealing with the complexity of business planning in diverse institutions, in private organizations and private businesses and government businesses at all levels. I think that now we have an opportunity of incredibly good fortune, divine fortune. We have technology that allows us to do complex models of business planning. But what we don't have is we don't have the right will and understanding what and how should those plans be devised. With me, any plan always has to put life first, because we are planning for life, for current living people, for new life being created. I come from a very old-fashioned family, and traditionally our whole existence was around feeding, nurture, nourishment, making space for new babies being born, educating children, taking care of older people, connecting with family and neighbors. So I come from families in which life of the family members, neighbors, country, the world was always at the center. And then money and capital and labor, other things were dominated by understanding of the centrality of life. Because today we have a situation in which money is centered and life sometimes doesn't even come into the picture. So there's a lot of unnecessary suffering on those issues. So before we continue with our thinking of how to reform healthcare, how to manage natural disasters, emergency funds, how to deal with global issues, we have to develop business planning at the level of the country of the United States of America that would be very sophisticated in dealing with matters of life, and that would have long-term vision of the country's destiny. Not just 4 years or 8 years, but 20 years, 40 years, 100 years. Those of you who have children or relatives who have children in the family know that you think in terms of another 8 years. When a baby is born, we all hope at least 8 years, maybe 100 years for that baby. So within the family, we have the need and understanding to think about the long vision for that child. At the level of government, we think in very short-term periods, 4 years, then sometimes just how to deal with conflicts between different office holders. And I looked at all kinds of information, pieces of information on the government, and there's really no talk and agreement on long-term business planning around finances within the government. Private companies do have that with certain exceptions, but those who depend on government funding also live in this constant anxiety of what will happen next year or then the following year. So in order for us to be open to vision of peace around matters of finance, we have to start thinking about how to develop models of business planning for diverse levels of the government that would look long term, short term, middle term, and long term. There are certain expenses that can be easily understood as long-term needs for planning, and that is housing, that is healthcare. We can look at that calendar and look at next 40, 50 years and develop very, very sophisticated evaluations of the needs. And of course, then we focus on the current needs, but with the will to create platform that would allow diverse points of view to discuss certain details of a long-term business plan, but there would be an agreement that it is something that is helpful. It's a structure that would be helpful. In case of healthcare, we have to have long-term vision of the cost for next 50, 60, 70, 80 years, and then to adjust current needs to it, and then to also have very sophisticated understanding of the cost, because healthcare within every government is one of the central responsibilities. So we need to be very sophisticated about this. And another business plan within the context of a country is how to create business plan connections with other countries. Again, this shouldn't be this haphazard way of signing one agreement and then 2 years later discarding it, signing another agreement. It's just such a painful and unstable way of dealing with international situations. So a country of a sophisticated powered authority like America can focus long term on the core issues connected with mutual benefit from different countries and stick to it, because we can differ on the margins, but if there is, for instance, a very beneficial relationship between America and Brazil, we should understand what the core values are in our business activities, and then have gentleman's agreement to stick to it. And if there is a difference or change, it would be on the margins, but not on the core interests that are mutually beneficent for both sides. The same applies to the military spending. We have to be very sophisticated in business part of the military, because if it is not adjusted for the current needs, it may end up creating a country with no defense. And we have now seen what is happening with natural disasters consequences in America, in which military was just overworked and not prepared to deal with those very vital situations in which people needed help of very well organized military. In California or in Florida and Texas, we saw that this was not done as it should be. So the military should have that long-term business plan too, not only in connection to the current military conflicts and dangers, but to long-term ways to ensure defense for people who live in an area like America that has climate situation connected with tornadoes and hurricanes and fires in other ways. So military has to be trained to help people in those war acts of nature. So we'll be continuing our conversations about business. And today, I thank you very much for your attention. And I encourage you to think about what I said. Many of you are from different countries. Let me know how you see those visions in context of your countries. And I believe that we have a chance to create long-term vision of peace for the world. Thank you so much, and see you here next week for another edition of Happiness and the City with Barbara.